It started on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where nothing unusual ever happens. Birds chirping, sprinklers running across green suburban lawns, neighbors heading off to work. Everything looked perfectly normal. Until I walked outside and my car was gone. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. I stood there in the driveway staring at the empty space where my car had been parked the night before. I looked up and down the street. Nothing. No broken glass, no tire marks, no sign of anything. For a moment, I wondered if someone had stolen it. But then I noticed something strange sitting on my front door. A small white envelope. And printed across the top were 3 letters I had learned to hate. Homeowners Association. That's when I knew exactly what had happened. And trust me, this story only gets worse from there. I'd lived in this neighborhood for about 2 years. Like many communities in the United States, it had an HOA that managed the rules. Parking regulations, lawn maintenance, trash bins, the usual stuff. Most of the time, it wasn't a big deal. Just follow the rules and nobody bothered you. But a few months earlier, something had changed. The neighborhood had elected a new HOA president, a man named Richard Collins. And Richard took his job very seriously. Maybe a little too seriously. Neighbors started getting warning letters for the smallest things. Trash cans left out an extra hour, garden decorations that were too visible, cars parked slightly outside driveway lines. People started whispering that Richard had turned the HOA into his personal power trip. At the time, I ignored it because I had never had any problems myself. Until the day my car disappeared. The envelope on my door contained a notice. Vehicle removed due to violation of HOA parking rules. I read the line 3 times. Violation? What violation? The paper included the location where the vehicle had been parked. And when I saw it, I laughed out loud because the location they listed was my own driveway. Apparently, the notice claimed I had been parked in a restricted guest space, which made absolutely no sense because my driveway wasn't a guest space, it was part of my property, or at least that's what I thought. But then I noticed something else on the paper. At the bottom was a signature, Richard Collins, the HOA president. Now here's the important part of the story. 2 weeks earlier, my driveway had been partially blocked because of some sidewalk repair work. The HOA had hired contractors to fix a section of pavement near my house. During the repairs, they asked me to temporarily park my car in one of the community guest spaces overnight. No problem. I even received written permission from the HOA office, a short email that said parking there was allowed during construction. So the night before my car disappeared, I had parked exactly where they told me to park, a marked guest space, right in front of the clubhouse, completely legal, completely approved. But apparently, someone didn't get the message, or maybe they just didn't care. I called the number listed on the notice. A towing company answered. They confirmed they had my car. They also confirmed something that made my blood boil. The tow order had come directly from the HOA president, Richard Collins. According to the tow company, Richard personally reported the car as illegally parked, and since HOA presidents often have authority to enforce parking rules, the tow truck had been dispatched immediately. The cost to retrieve the car? $380 plus storage fees if I waited too long. I couldn't believe it, but I paid the fee and picked up the car that afternoon, because at that moment, I had a much bigger plan. Before leaving the towing lot, I asked for something very important. A copy of the tow authorization form. The employee handed it to me, and there it was. Richard's name, Richard's signature, Richard's order. He had personally authorized towing my vehicle without checking the permission I had been given. And that was the moment I realized something. This wasn't just a mistake. This was negligence. When I got home, I started gathering documents. The email that gave me parking permission, the HOA notice, the tow receipt, the authorization form, everything. Then I printed copies of it all because the next HOA meeting was only 3 days away and I planned to attend. The meeting took place in the small community clubhouse. Usually only 5 or 6 residents showed up, but that evening the room was nearly full. Word travels fast in neighborhoods, especially when someone's car gets towed. Richard sat at the front table with the rest of the HOA board. He looked confident, relaxed, like nothing unusual had happened. But that confidence didn't last long. When the meeting opened for homeowner comments, I stood up. I calmly explained what had happened. I described waking up to an empty driveway. I explained the tow. Then I held up the printed email granting permission to park in the guest space. The room got very quiet. Richard leaned forward and said something that surprised everyone. He said he had never seen that email, which meant one of two things. Either the HOA office failed to inform him, or he never bothered to check before ordering the tow. Neither explanation made him look very good. But the story didn't end there, because another resident spoke up, then another, and suddenly people started sharing their own stories. Cars warned for minor parking issues, letters for tiny violations, fines for harmless mistakes. Apparently, Richard's strict rule enforcement had been bothering a lot of people. My car being towed was just the tipping point. The HOA board decided to pause the meeting for a private discussion. They stepped into another room for about 15 minutes. When they returned, the mood had completely changed. Richard looked irritated, but the other board members looked concerned. The board president pro tem cleared his throat and made an announcement. The HOA would reimburse the towing fee immediately, but that wasn't all, because one of the board members had reviewed the towing policy. And according to their own guidelines, vehicles cannot be towed from guest spaces without a prior written warning, which I had never received, meaning the tow itself violated HOA policy. In other words, Richard had broken the rules he was supposed to enforce. The room erupted in murmurs. Neighbors looked at each other in disbelief. Some even started laughing. The board member continued speaking. Because of the improper tow, the HOA would not only reimburse my $380 fee, they would also pay additional compensation for the inconvenience. Total reimbursement, over $1,200. And that money would come directly from the HOA operating fund. Richard didn't say a word, but the story still wasn't finished, because something else happened after that meeting. 2 weeks later, the HOA held a special election. Several residents nominated new board members, including someone who had spoken up during the meeting. The turnout was the highest the neighborhood had ever seen, and by the end of the night, Richard Collins was no longer the HOA president. These days, the neighborhood is a lot calmer. Parking rules still exist, HOA meetings still happen, but people treat each other with a lot more respect. And every time I park my car in that guest space near the clubhouse, I can't help but smile, because that's the exact spot where this whole ridiculous story started. The spot where the HOA president tried to tow my car, only to discover later it was the worst decision he could have made. Because sometimes when someone abuses a little power, all it takes is one mistake for the entire neighborhood to notice.